I'm here at Chalk Valley History Festival with Jeremy Bowen, Middle East editor for the BBC, presenter and author. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me. We appreciate your time.
Not at all. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, well, in this book, The Making of the Modern Middle East, and in the series that preceded it, you met ordinary people at home and on the front lines, as well as their leaders. How did the difference in their positions, their hierarchies, impact and inform your understanding of the wider issues?
You know, one thing I've found, I think, in the years I've been a foreign correspondent for the BBC, many years, most of my passing
only at Chalk Valley.
Passing 1940s armoured vehicles.
Yes.
Jacket.
I've got one of those. Amazing. No. Well, now the 8th Army's passed us by, we can continue our conversation. Sorry, what was the question?
So the question was, how does the difference in the hierarchies or status of people that you've interviewed impact or...
One thing I've learned over many years as a foreign correspondent is that actually human beings, whatever their backgrounds, tend to want the same kinds of things. They want to have a relatively peaceful life. They want to have the opportunity to provide for their families, to not get killed, to have homes. And that's something, even in people who are seemingly very disadvantaged, with lives very different to the ones that we have here in this country, that they basically still want those sorts of things. And their children get killed, they're very sad. It's not like, oh, we've got another 10 of those. It's not at all like that. I've heard people saying, people don't feel things the same way. They do. Human beings feel the same things. And as for leaders, it's about power. And in different sorts of countries, there's different ways of trying to get power. And one of the things about the Middle East that's important to understand is that there's an enormous crisis of governance in that people at the top of quite a lot of countries are not there to help the people, they're there to help themselves.
And here in the West, we can often feel quite disconnected from those on-the-ground stories in the Middle East. How important do you think it is for us over here to have a greater understanding or appreciation for what's going on?
We can't ignore what happens, even if it's simply just the question of, it's not simply that awful things happen, we should know about them. Yeah. They have an impact on our lives. They have an impact on the way that refugees move around the world. They have an impact on the way economies work. So what we have to remember about the Middle East is that when you're sitting on your Mediterranean beach holiday, if you're fortunate enough to be having one, actually beyond the horizon, on the other side of the Mediterranean, there's the Middle East. It's not very far away.
Yeah. And you start this book with a story from your own personal history from 1989. How large does the history of the region loom in the modern Middle East?
Oh, I think it's really important. I think that people, particularly Israelis and Palestinians, but not just, people's identities are shaped by it and people's attitudes are shaped by it. And if you don't get the history of the Middle East, you will never get the Middle East. You won't understand it. So you have to understand how they got to where they are.
So how do you prepare to enter a place like the Middle East, where it's potentially dangerous, potentially deadly?
Well, I've been going for a long time, and I've lived over there. I lived in Jerusalem for 5 years plus. So for me, it's quite familiar. But I think in general, if anyone's contemplating a trip, even if you're going on holiday there, and there's some wonderful places to visit, Jordan and Petra, places like that, then I would really strongly say read a few books about the history of the region and try and see how the connections work, see how the background is, and you know, you can start with my book if you wanted. That would be a good
place to
beginning.
start. Absolutely. Are there any tips or pieces of advice you'd give to the next generation of war reporters or journalists?
Remember, it's about the truth and about an interesting way of finding out the truth and telling a story. Stories are all about humans, and humans' lives are infinitely complex and interesting. And if you try and present your stories in that way, then you might find people listening to them, and that's what it's all about. But don't forget, what we are all about is trying to tell the truth about what's happening.
And as a very brief final question from me, how have you been finding the Chalk Valley History Festival?
It's absolutely brilliant. We're in the sun in a beautiful part of England. What is not to like? And I didn't quite realize it would be like this. I think it's amazing. I've never seen anything like it.
Oh,
great. I've never been interrupted in the middle of an interview like this, as we just were, by people commemorating and challenging and channeling the events in the Western Desert in 1942. So that's something, you know.
It is, only at Chalk Valley.
Yeah.
Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for your
pleasure.
time. It's a great to chat
Thank
to
you. All right.
Thank you.